Honored to be joined by the great Trevor Sikkema of Pro Football Focus. You find him at Tampa Bay Trey on Twitter. And Trevor, this is go time for y'all. This is big time. We are less than a week from the day that people's names start getting called. And I'm always curious, as you guys study this year round, get ready for this. At what point do you say, okay, how can we possibly change our opinions now? Like what is there left to change here?
Well, we're kind of like to that point, right? Where people are just like, okay, the draft can get here now, right? It feels like when we reach second week of April, that's kind of what everybody's thoughts are. And it's funny because the draft actually used to be further back in the calendar. Like there was a time when the draft was in May. And I think people in the NFL were just like, absolutely not. We cannot keep doing this. And especially with how much the draft cycle and the draft process has grown as a major part of the NFL calendar. I think that we're all just ready for it to be here, myself included. Like I've just submitted my final draft guide report, final draft guide page. And so that's all filed away. The big board is complete. The final mock drafts will come out like 24 hours before the draft, but now it's just kind of a little bit of a waiting game. Like we're waiting until next week to just see what happens.
Well, we're all kind of in agreement on Caleb Williams. I think we've probably been in agreement on Caleb Williams for over a year now. Mm-hmm. But right after that, the Drake May, Jaden Daniels, and now JJ McCarthy in there, that conversation is fascinating to me because, like, I'll put it to you. Do you think it matters more basically what Cliff Kingsbury wants in a quarterback with the Commanders? Or is it just who's better? Like if you were picking, if you were the Commanders, which one of those guys are you taking?
So, I mean, sometimes that comes into being a factor of certain position evaluations. Like you have to envision those players on your team and how they're going to fit with your offense and your offensive coordinator. But I always kind of push back on the, how does this player fit with this coordinator? Because let's face it, if Jaden Daniels or Drake May gets drafted to the Washington Commanders, right? And they light the world on fire this upcoming year. Or shoot, maybe it's this year and then next year, right? Like next year, they play really well. It's a 2-year thing. Guess what? Cliff Kingsbury's gone. Like he's out of there. He's going to get another head coaching job because he's proven that he could take a young quarterback and make him a great quarterback in the NFL. So I always hesitate with you want to get guys that obviously fit your scheme, but you want to get guys that fit your scheme and your identity of your head coach, who you hope isn't going anywhere, and your general manager who's building the team a certain way with a certain like DNA of these guys, character makeup, culture, if you will. So like those are the things that I gravitate towards a little bit more. And number 2 overall for Washington, okay, yeah, like Jaden might be better for Cliff Kingsbury, but I think Drake May is the better prospect overall. I think Drake May has got the better overall arm talent. I think that he is a quarterback who I'm not worried about hitting basically every single throw at an NFL level. And so like, that's the guy that I would be picking if I was the Washington Commanders. You could sit here and talk about the connection with offensive coordinators all you want, but I don't think that Drake May would be bad in any way, shape, or form in a Cliff Kingsbury offense. And anytime that it's close, I'm not really going to let the coordinator sway my opinion of a guy that you hope is going to be in your organization for the next 10 years. Because if you think that this guy is going to be your 2-contract type of franchise quarterback, well, guess what? They're probably only going to have this offensive coordinator for 2 years max if they're that good. So that's why I kind of push back on that narrative, and I'd be taking Drake May at number 2.
So another reason why I love talking to you, Trey, is because you watch college football. Unlike a lot of the folks who study the NFL draft, they may be looking at cut-ups, they may be looking at scheme fits for NFL teams, but you actually watch college football as it's happening. And so you're the perfect person to help explain to me the JJ McCarthy stuff. Like, I like JJ McCarthy. I think he's a good quarterback. I think he did a good job at Michigan. They didn't ask him to do that much, but when he needed to do stuff, he came through. Final drive of regulation of the Rose Bowl, for example. But if you'd have said at the Rose Bowl, this guy's top 5 pick, I would have been like, Really? Are we sure about that? But that seems to be where everybody has him.
So the reason why I think we're here with JJ McCarthy is it's kind of a multi-layered answer, right? One of them is because at this time of the year, I would say late February into March, and then especially into April, we're doing mock drafts for what we think is going to happen. That's why there's been such a swing from December and January mocks when McCarthy was sort of second round pick, maybe late first round pick. And that's kind of the range that I have him when it comes to an overall grade. I've got McCarthy with a late first, early second round grade. But when you think that there is even a small chance that a quarterback can be a Super Bowl caliber quarterback for you, you're going to pay the quarterback tax to draft him. And the quarterback tax is often a top 10 pick. And that just kind of is what it is. So for McCarthy, I really didn't like his 2022 tape. I'm going to be honest with you. Like that first year that he was a starter, I thought he was a long way away from being an NFL quarterback. Really didn't feel pressure really well. Didn't have a good feel for the pocket. Didn't know when to hang tough. Didn't know when to escape and extend the plays. Was late getting to his different progressions. Was really fooled by defenses with how they were rotating their safeties and their linebackers. The sim pressures that they would show pre-snap versus what they would drop to in the post-snap. Like he was really confused. And just you could tell he was really inexperienced in those areas. All of that stuff got better in 2023. And it did. And he wasn't asked to throw for 300, 400 yards every single game. You mentioned, like, I'm a fan of college football. I watch a lot of college football. I watched how Michigan operated, and Michigan had the best offensive line in the country. They had great wide receivers. They had a really good run game, and they had a fantastic defense. They did not need McCarthy to throw for 400 yards a game. They didn't. And so they didn't ask him to do it. They instead played pretty risk-averse football, did exactly what they needed to do, set up a very efficient offense. But in those moments, and you mentioned him there, where they said to McCarthy, hey, go make a play, right? Third and long, go make a play. Last drive of the Rose Bowl, hey, go win it for us. He did step up in those moments. They weren't as numerous as it was for other teams that put more on their quarterback's plate. But how do we really fault him too much for, okay, maybe he didn't have the volume of opportunities, but when he got that opportunity, most often he really stepped up to the plate. So I think that goes into evaluation, how much he improved from 2022 to 2023, how he's just 20 years old. He's going to be 21 as a rookie. You got to believe that everything is still maturing for him. You know, he's going to get stronger. He's going to get bigger. He's going to learn the game better. He's going to speed up his process. We already saw it speed up from year to year in 2022 to 2023. And I think the last kind of factor here is, why are we seeing him in top 10s mocks? Well, in February, we learn more about what NFL teams think, as opposed to maybe what draft evaluators think. That's when teams really start to turn the page and they start to really dig into this draft class. And the people that talk to agents from within the buildings talk more in February and March. And so we learned a lot more about where the league might be when it comes to how high these guys could go. So that's ultimately the way that I would answer the JJ McCarthy rise and how we got here.
Okay, so let's say the quarterback tax does get paid, and it is 1, 2, 3, 4 quarterbacks, and you are Jim Harbaugh. I'm going to put you in We're going to put you in Jim Harbaugh's RV. You're living the Rockford Files life out in Huntington Beach. You have a choice. You're going to go receiver. You taking Marvin Harrison? You taking Malik Nabers? You taking Roma Dunze? This is pick your flavor. Who you got?
A good problem to have, right? I mean, we're in a year where you can take any three of these guys and plop them in basically any other draft class, I would say, over the last decade. And one of these guys is probably wide receiver 1. Any of them could be wide receiver 1 in that draft class. So it's a special year to have all three of them in one. I would be taking Marvin Harrison Jr., and I really wouldn't be thinking twice about it. And to say it like that sounds insulting to the talent level of Odunze and Malik Nabers, who I also think have all pro ability. But what Marvin Harrison has shown over the last 2 years is just a true sophomore and a true junior, is a mastery of the position that is very, very rare. His athletic ability, there's really not a hole to his game. The only big area of concern that I had from him going into the year was, okay, I didn't really think he was a big yards after catch receiver in 2022. And I noted, like, that could have been because of the situations that they put him in. He was more of a sideline receiver that year. You know, they had Jackson Smith and Jigba. They had Emeka Egbuka as well. So him being more of that sideline receiver, maybe that was just the yards after catch issue. And then this past year, they put him in more situations to show that he could have the speed to be a yards after catch guy. And guess what? He did. So just the total roundness of his wide receiver profile is so rare. He reminds me a lot of like a taller version of Devontae Adams. And obviously he has a ways to go to being that at an NFL level. But if you watch how he won at the college level, it was like a college version of what we see Devontae Adams and how he wins in the NFL. Elite releases, fantastic route runner, good catch through traffic, really nice speed. Because like Devontae's not the fastest burner out there. He's not the biggest or strongest guy, but he is all of those things combined at a decently high level. And honestly, was one of the best receivers in the game. That's insulting to him. A very high level. And that was Marvin Harrison this past year. I cannot pass up on a player like that. If I was Harbaugh at number 5, and Harbaugh got a good look at Marvin Harrison Jr., as the last 2 years, he put up 100 yards back-to-back and at least 1 touchdown, including on what is going to be a first-round pick corner next year in Will Johnson in 2023. So I think he'd be coming.
Harbaugh wasn't there that day. I think he watched the film, though.
I think that he probably did watch the film. Yeah. I think that he probably watched
it. It's amazing the quality of the receiver. It feels like it goes pretty deep in this draft at receiver. I mean, I'm looking at guys that could potentially be 2nd-round picks, 3rd-round picks that I think could be very good. And like Keon Coleman's a guy that we kind of knew he wasn't going to test all that well, but like you watch him play at Florida State, and you're like, this guy's going to be good no matter where he plays.
Keon's an enigma to me because, man, I would push back on you a little bit there. I felt like he should have tested well. Like,
okay.
Like he's a crazy athlete. Yeah, dude.
He looks faster on the field than he looked in underwear.
And that's the mind-boggling thing is he runs a 4.61 at the combine, and yet when he was going through the wide receiver gauntlet drills at the combine, he had the fastest in drill speed. So he was the slowest guy at the 40. And then when it came to the actual receiver drills, he was the fastest guy. Where is the middle ground? And then he goes to his pro day, right? So a 4.61 as a wide receiver, especially one that's supposed to be as explosive as he is, okay, you got to run faster than a 4.61. We get to Florida State's pro day, he doesn't run. He stands on his 4.61 that he ran in Indianapolis. It's like, what? How? What? How are we here? This guy is, and the reason why it goes so much more into why he is an enigma as a wide receiver, because his separation scores are terrible. I mean, he is never creating a separation throwing window for his quarterback, almost never. And yet, this is somebody who, after the catch, we watch him have all sorts of flexibility and agility and wiggle. They throw a wide receiver screen to him. He becomes a backyard playmaker. They put this guy on punt return, for goodness sake, because of how much of a playmaker he is and how much he can make guys miss in space and show you those juke moves and that flexibility. And yet he can't separate when he's running his routes. Make it make sense. I can't. So that's why it's just so strange to watch him play and then project what's exactly going to show up at the NFL level.
And that's the roll of the dice. That's the roll of the dice, because you can get that guy and it turns out, oh, he's just a great football player. And when the pads come on and the lights are on, he's fantastic. Or it's when he plays against NFL level corners, that inability to separate, he can't then suddenly overpower them the way he would in 50-50 ball scenarios.
Right.
And then where are you? This is why it's such a crapshoot. This is why so many staffs get fired.
Mm-hmm. No, there's no doubt about it. And it's always, the draft is a lot of things, but at the end of the day, it is, you got to pick the right football players. And I was just on a show not too long ago talking about the Chicago Bears and what they could do at number 9 overall. This is just for an example. And they put a scenario in front of me where, okay, Rome Odunze was still on the board at number 9. Mm-hmm. And they're like, but Chicago only has 4 picks in this draft, so they'd love to trade back and get some extra picks. So they put a scenario to me where, okay, what if you're Chicago and Odunze is on the board, but you can trade back into the 20s, maybe 28 with Buffalo, for example, who really desperately needs a receiver now. And they're giving you next year's first rounder, and they're giving you more picks in this year's draft. And I guarantee you're going to come away with A.D. Mitchell, who I have as my wide receiver 4 in this class. I think he's really damn good. But even in that scenario, I said to them, I'd take Rome. I would take Rome Odunze because I just, even for as much as I think that Mitchell's incredibly talented, the what if with so many of these receivers or prospects in general, the further you get down the draft, it just becomes like you said, a roll of the dice. It becomes a throw of a dart at the dartboard. And the higher you are picking, the bigger the bullseye is supposed to get. And if I want a receiver and Rome Odunze sitting there, that's a pretty big bullseye. So I'm not going to get cute with it, and I'm going to take a guy like that. But it's always really interesting conversations for those reasons.
So I'm fascinated, and I've seen multiple people say this draft could set a record for offensive players taken in the first round. It's not just the receivers and quarterbacks, though. Mm-hmm. Like I'm looking at the combined mock draft that you guys did at PFF and seeing how many interior offensive linemen. You have Jackson Powers Johnson, the Oregon center, going 16. And you've got a Duke offensive lineman in Graham Barton. It's amazing to me how these guys, because those positions, I've always been told you have to be so good as a center, as a guard, to jump into the first round. But what is it about these guys that is special?
I think they're just really good football players. Now, I don't know if all those interior offensive linemen end up going in the first round. If you see Troy Fautanu from Washington is more of an interior guy, okay, I think that's one lock. I think Graham Barton is going in the first round, so I think that's two locks. I would say there's a good chance that Jackson Powers Johnson goes in the first round, but it's been trending more towards, late 20s, maybe fringe first round, might still be on the board at the top of the second round, sort of because of that positional value. But the reason why all of those guys are even seen as potential first round players, and you could throw Zach Frazier from West Virginia in there as well.
Yeah.
You don't
who is the ultimate football player's football player.
Yes, right. And you don't normally take centers that high, but when you can say, okay, he's a center, but he could also play guard for me, which I think is the case for all of those guys that I mentioned. I think Fautanu could play center, or he could play guard, or he could play tackle, which is why he's going to go high. I think Graham Barton could play guard for you, and if you ever need him to play tackle in a pinch, he can, because he started at left tackle for Duke. I think that Powers Johnson has the strength level and the mobility and the quick feet to be able to play either center or guard. Zach Frazier, the same thing. He's got the right size. He's got the length. He's got the core strength to be able to play center or guard. So those players that are these versatile starting interior offensive linemen who could start at a multitude of spots, that then becomes a little bit more valuable. And yeah, we just have so many of these players who are just really dang good offensive linemen. And because of it, I think a lot of NFL teams realize, hey, this doesn't happen every year. We don't often have a year where this many good players could all go in the first round from the offensive trenches. And that's why you see a massive run in mock drafts of those guys going pretty early.
Well, and that's why I want to ask you about Amarius Mims from Georgia and Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, because those are guys that they're not the most polished offensive tackles in the world, but their athletic traits are so off the charts. Like I feel like if you showed Amarius Mims and Tyler Guyton to someone who played offensive line in the NFL in the 1980s, they would not believe such human beings exist.
And dude, I saw the pictures of just Amarius Mims standing next to regular human beings when he was walking around the combine in Indianapolis. And I don't know if there's a human being that's ever carried 340 pounds better than Amarius Mims. That's not on steroids and is about to get on stage at Mr. Olympia, right? I mean, that's kind of like what we're talking about here. And those two guys, they're very fascinating because as athletes, they're very rare athletes, but both of them have sort of this other side of the coin. Amarius Mims has not played a lot of football over the last 3 years. George has been so good and so talented that during his first years of being in Athens, he didn't really play much because there just
that's why he hit the portal.
Right.
He was going to go to Florida State.
I know, and they had to
get on the field.
Right. They had to convince him to come back, and he did. And okay, he started at right tackle, but then he's got the ankle injury, and so he missed a lot of time this past year. So it's like, man, he's barely got any time that he's actually played the game of football. But you watch him and you watch him move, and you say, God, just draft this dude and let an offensive line coach at the NFL level kind of work with him for the next couple of years, and you might have an all-pro on your hand. You might. But this Tyler Guyton, kind of the same thing. 1 year starter at Oklahoma. If you watch Tyler Guyton right now, the way that I would describe it to you is he's not really a blocker. He's just a shover. Like he just when defensive linemen get into his chest and they get close to him, he just tries to shove them as hard and as far away from him as possible. He's not putting the hands underneath the armpits, and he's not trying to lock these guys up and get his grip strength in there and really just control them and maintain that block. And so even Tyler Guyton is very frustrating because he has so much. I mean, he's so raw. He is so raw as a player. But again, you watch how the dude moves and you go, God, you could lose 40 pounds and play tight end. Like, that's how well you move. So there's a handful of guys like that who are super alluring athletes as offensive tackles. And I think the league's just going to, like you mentioned, again, roll the dice on these guys because they are that talented. They have that high of a ceiling.
I cannot wait because there is an element of this may not work or this may hit huge. That's what I love about the draft, because it really is a big casino at the end of the day. Trevor, thank you so much.
I appreciate it, man. No, this is a fun draft class. It's a lot of fun to talk about a lot of these guys. So appreciate you having me, buddy.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.